Retro.
Are you an aspiring Jedi, or do you dabble with the dark side of the Force?
Regardless of whether you fancy yourself a defender of the light or an aspiring Sith Lord, you're going to need a lightsaber.
Podcast Stardust is pleased to partner with Saber Masters, the creators of high-quality, durable, and affordable lightsabers.
Saber Masters is preparing to launch the Ultimate Lightsaber 2.0, and right now you can get 2 for the price of 1.
So, check out the link in our show notes and go get your Ultimate Lightsabers from Saber Masters.
And don't forget to use our referral code Stardust to save $10 at checkout.
And each purchase using our referral code helps support Podcast Stardust.
Hi, this is Emily Swallow, the armorer in The Mandalorian. You're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. This is the way.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
We have a really fun episode in store for this evening as we are set to discuss Star Wars Infinities, A New Hope. But before we get into that, Jay can remind everybody where we can be found around the internet.
Definitely, Dennis. And we can infinitely be found on Facebook, Instagram, and X at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the dish is aligned. The signal is boosted to maximum output. The shield's down. We're now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we're going to take up the Star Wars Infinity series, which was put out by Dark Horse Comics back in 2001. This was while Dark Horse had the license to put out Star Wars comics before Marvel got it back in 2015. The Infinities line, Jay, was kind of the Star Wars version of What If, where they went in and tweaked one thing that happened in the movie and then wrote a story about what would have happened afterwards. And we'll get into that one thing here in just a bit. But again, the first 4 issues are focusing on one change that came out of that they made to A New Hope. What'd you think about this concept?
Oh, I thought it was so much fun. And I'm so glad that we ended up picking these up after all of the discussion in our news episode surrounding the, what ifs of Star Wars. And I really, really thought that this was well done. And some of the issues were a little bit more, I felt, on the nose and believable and relatable than others. But overall, it was a heck of a lot of fun. And I cannot wait to break these down with you. But I know you'd read them before. This was my first time through them.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just so much fun. But how were you after revisiting them? What did you think? Did you have any new feelings about them, or, overall, what's your take? What's your thoughts?
Well, yeah, since we're doing non-spoiler version discussion right at the moment, before we get into some of the details. I liked the Star Wars Infinities A New Hope story when I read it the first time. I liked it better than I remember liking it when I reread it. Like I said, I didn't dislike it. I liked it quite a bit, which, encouraged me to go on to read the Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi Infinity stories that they did as well. And with all this distance, I could see where, how to say this. This story came out again in 2001. So we had the original trilogy and we had the Phantom Menace. We didn't have the Attack of the Clones. We didn't have we didn't have Revenge of the Sith. We didn't have the Clone Wars, and we didn't have a whole lot of other lore that we have now. So I thought it did a very good job of coming up with this story based on what was available to them without, the benefit of 2 prequel trilogy movies and a whole lot of prequel era content that really did play into what the final outcome of the story was. But I thought it was also pretty cool the way that they hit a lot of familiar story beats from the original trilogy, but then they put a twist on it.
Mhm.
So, which added some credibility to the story they were telling without making it just like the exact same thing. if that
Oh,
makes
I
sense.
totally agree. Yeah, it does make sense. And, it almost had sort of a Legends feel to it, and so
Mhm.
I think I was kind of approaching it with that mindset as well that, just let it in, enjoy the stories and don't overthink it too much, but yet, think about it to the point of how do you feel about it? But it was a fun ride.
Mhm. All right. Well, we'll start getting into a few more details now. So if we've piqued your curiosity and you want to read this before you get to our discussion, it's available on apps like Marvel Unlimited. You can find it on Kindle, on Amazon. Jay, I think you got your copy from the library,
Mhm.
and it shows up sometimes in used bookstores as well. So I don't know if they have any print editions left on Amazon. I didn't check for that, but at any rate,
They're
um,
expensive. Let me just tell you right now.
okay, there you go. So this was Star Wars: Infinity's New Hope had a script by Chris Warner. Pencils were by Drew Johnson and Al Rio. Inks by Ray Snyder, Neil Nelson. Colors by Dave McCaig and Helen Bach. Letters by Steve Detro. The cover art was provided by Tony Harris with colors by Chris Blythe. The designer was Keith Wood, and the editorial was Philip Simon and Dave Land. So, as I mentioned, came out in 2001. The setup for Infinity's A New Hope is that we pick up the story on the attack on the Death Star, and Luke is making his trench run. He's got the targeting computer going, and Ben encourages him to let go and use the Force. Han shows up and takes out the TIE fighters behind him. Luke fires his torpedoes. They start to go down the shaft, but they detonate prematurely. So they don't blow up the Death Star. They go to blow up Yavin 4, but the blast was not anywhere close to full power, and all it does is some damage to the planet. The rebels flee, and then Princess Leia is captured by Darth Vader, along with a bunch of other rebel leaders right before the Death Star gains full power, and they go on to blow up Yavin 4. It essentially spells the end of the rebellion. Leia ends up in Vader's custody, and Luke and Han end up flying off to Dagobah. We'll get to that in a second. What'd you think about the twist that they put on this?
Oh, it was so cool. And what I liked about it, and as much as, of course, we love A New Hope, and that is our Star Wars. This is almost in some ways more realistic. To think that those torpedoes would not have perfectly flown down the reactor shaft. But of course, in the actual A New Hope movie, it's because the Force helped him. But in this case, the fact that it detonated short of the reactor and it did do some damage, and they had to kind of, gather the troops on the Death Star and figure out how they were going to move forward with that, and then ultimately destroy Yavin was almost more believable in a way. And so I tried to embrace that idea a little bit more. Of course, I didn't like the idea that it was essentially the end of the rebellion, because that's kind of the heartbeat, of
Mm-hmm.
everything that goes on in Star Wars. But I was like, okay, I'll bite, I'll go on this ride. And yeah, it was definitely, it makes you feel different, to think about, oh my gosh, yeah, the rebellion does not exist after this. And then
Right.
now here's Leia in custody of the Empire. Like, it gives you a completely different feel.
Yeah. So that was great, and I got a couple things that that inspired me to make comment on. First off, I'm with you. I thought the fact that the torpedoes essentially malfunctioned and blew up prematurely was the right way to do it instead of having Luke miss, because
Yes.
then it still paid off him listening to Ben and using the Force. He did that, and it should have worked, but it did not. And two, this, I think, my second reading of this was enhanced by the release of Rogue One in the interim between 2001
Mhm.
and now, because the Rebel Council was ready to disband and sue for peace with the Empire once they heard about the Death Star. And so when the Death Star is there and it's clear to flash and it shoots at the Yavin 4 after it doesn't blow up, Leia's like, she's furious. She tells Janet Donna is like, the rebellion's dead. I mean, and
Wow.
she's about to storm off, and she knows why, because if we give this comic the benefit of Rogue One, the Rebel Council was prepared to pack it in when they heard about the Death Star. And they have nothing left that can stand up to the power of that battle station. So it makes
Mhm.
complete sense that the rebellion had gone away.
Oh, yeah, that is a fantastic reference to Rogue One too, and you're absolutely right. I mean, that just hits home for
Hmm.
sure. Yep.
So when we get to the second issue in this series, Leia is in Vader's custody, and she gets back onto the Death Star, and Tarkin grabs her by the chin again. Is like, once again, you're our guest, and yeah, I just so slimy. I wanted
Yeah.
her to smack him, but he did not. But instead of terminating Leia, Vader brings her to the Emperor on Coruscant, where
Mhm.
Vader then has Leia returned to his custody by the Emperor for re-education purposes. A couple things. One, this basically is Leia's fall to the dark side, and she gets trained
Mhm.
as a new dark side apprentice. They're not using the word Sith here,
Right.
yeah, in this context yet, but I thought it was clever. Vader gives her Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber and basically encourages her to embrace her grief and her anger and release it, makes her powerful. And she does. And that's her fall to the dark side there. There's that. And two, of all the dark side Leia concepts I've ever seen, this was like the best one I think
Oh,
I've
yeah.
ever. She's in that all black, kind of imperial formal attire, and it worked for a dark side aspirant.
Mhm. Oh, no, I totally agree, and, at first, you almost get the feeling, or at least I did, that there was some brainwashing going on, but then again, I mean, as we saw in the first issue, Leia was done with the rebellion. It was like, yeah, okay, it's done. And so she could see now the other perspective of things. And then the moment that she grabbed Obi-Wan's lightsaber and she tried to strike Vader down, of course, my brain's going crazy with all the different correlations of, Empire Strikes Back and like all of
Mhm.
these different things. And but I can see Leia justifying why she would switch sides, so to speak, and why she would embrace the opposite view. And it worked. It totally worked. And you're right. She looked fantastic in that. It was very, very believable.
Yeah. Well, and Vader preys upon her sensitivities by saying, the emperor is dying,
Yeah.
and this empire was forged out of a war, and that war is over now. So we need to reforge the empire so we can use its resources to generate prosperity, to and
Mhm.
and funnel the wonder of everything it can be. That okay, we did not even get Revenge of the Sith at this time,
Yes.
but that was the type of thing Anakin was promising Padme.
Yes.
So, I just thought that, Chris Warner was very, perceptive in what Anakin might want in coming up with that for this script.
Mhm, and I'm so glad that you pointed that out too, because I was thinking the exact same thing, to the point where I actually had to go back and say, "Okay, when did this come out?" Holy cow, that is like, eh, predicting the future right there,
Yeah,
because
very
I
prophetic.
felt the same way. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So to keep moving along here, that's where Leia is, and she's basically been left with Vader. Meantime, going taking a step back, Luke and Han have like tons of TIE fighters to evade. They have to get away from the Empire. They fly through the debris of Yavin 4, but Luke's X-Wing is so damaged that he ends up having to board the Falcon. And don't forget, R2D2's been shot in the dome. And
Mhm,
so he's of no use at the moment. And so he gets aboard the Millennium Falcon, and he's so distraught. He takes a swing at Han
mhm.
and ends up pulling his lightsaber on him before Obi-Wan Kenobi's ghost starts talking to him again. What'd you think about Luke in that moment?
He was a major loose cannon at that point, and, that was a part of it for me that it was a little cringy
Mhm.
that all of a sudden he's just going whole hog on Han, and Han's not having any of it. But, in some ways I thought, okay, I could kind of see his frustration, but then again, he's kind of giving in to his anger and his almost dark side as well, which of course is why Ben says, "No, Luke, don't do this kind of thing." But yeah, they were just like throwing down there for a little bit.
Yeah. I did think it was kind of funny over the course of these 4 issues, there's a number of times that Ben would be talking to Luke and Han couldn't see him, and Han's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Who are you talking to?"
What are you doing,
And
man?
then he'd be, like, glancing over at Chewbacca, and Chewbacca's like, so it's it's just
Yeah, that
that
was
is
good.
that
I
was
did laugh out loud for real.
but at any rate, Luke regains his composure and tells Han that, Ben's told him they need to go to Dagobah. So they go to Dagobah. I thought this was gonna be corny the first time I read it, but it really worked for me
Mhm.
because they get there and they all 4 go ashore and meet Yoda. And when they get to the hut and Yoda is playing all coy about, "Help you find your friend, I will," but, "Now it's time for the Jedi to eat," and all that stuff like that. Han sees right through
Oh,
that
yeah.
and just points out to Luke, he's like, "You do realize this is Yoda right here. He's takes a con to know a con."
Uh-huh.
And then Yoda just, like, immediately drops the whole act and is like, "Yeah, I can train you." So, I
Yep.
I just thought I just didn't ever really think before reading this how Han and Yoda would have got along, if at all. But I think they did a pretty good job with that. And while we're on the subject of Han, I'm also glad that he didn't do the severe amount of backsliding after the rebellion lost there at Yavin. I mean, he basically grasped the reality that the rebellion was finished and that, he couldn't take on the empire with Luke. That was a losing effort. But it's not like he just basically said, went back into I'm in it for the money type of a thing. He helped out his friend.
Right.
He
Mhm.
still was that same scoundrel with a heart of gold.
Right, exactly. And yeah, I appreciated that too. And I'm glad that I liked how they went to Dagobah together. I just that did work.
Yeah, it did. Now, what was really interesting about this is that Han leaves and leaves Luke on Dagobah for 5 years.
Years. Yeah.
And in the interim time, Leia is training with Vader, Luke is training with Yoda, and Han and Luke both believe that Leia is dead. They had no idea that she survived that. As far as they knew, she was caught in the explosion on Yavin 4. They didn't know that anyone got off that planet or that moon,
Mhm.
I should say. And so when Han is sitting in a cantina on Ord Mantell and sees that hollow transmission where Leia is now like a spokesperson for the Empire, she's actually the delegate to the new Imperial Senate from Coruscant. And she's talking about, the error of her ways in the past and how the Empire's helped her see the light and this like that. Han destroys the view screen
Mhm.
because he's so upset by this and then has to get out of there before a bunch of bounty hunters and then some Imperial stormtroopers that his attention he grabs, are onto him and capture him and take him back to Jabba. I thought that was a pretty good way of making that reveal.
Oh, I did too. It was brilliant. And it was chilling in a lot of ways too, just to see Leia almost like a General Hux in a way, is how I
Mhm.
felt. Like she was, like you said, she's the spokesperson and she's this reformed rebel, and she even talks about the rebellion as being, we murdered thousands and it was very ill formed and all of these different kinds of things. And it's like, wow, this is very different Leia. A very
Mhm.
different Leia.
So we're really in the heart of the differences between the trilogy as we know it and then what this one change has made. And of course, we've touched on a few things. So Han decides he's got to get back to Luke. And so he goes back to Dagobah, where we find Luke still training with Yoda. And again, for 5 years, as opposed to the few months it was in The Empire Strikes Back. And Luke's training is nearing its end. Luke has got all of his black attire now, which I don't know how he acquired it there on Dagobah, but yeah, we can look past that. It's just
Yeah.
the story is the story. There's a couple things that happened to Luke on his training. He still had a cave sequence like what we saw in The Empire Strikes Back, still took his weapons in there, but when he fought Vader and sliced off the head, Leia's face was revealed
Mhm.
inside. And that is what we got to see at the end of the second issue. So that was like a cliffhanger for a month on that. What did you think about that twist on that fight?
Oh, I thought that was brilliant because
Mhm.
it totally makes sense seeing as how we've seen Leia now in that role. even though, we don't know exactly what's going to go forward with Luke's training at this point in this issue. But that is a cool little twist that instead of Luke, it's Leia.
Did it make sense though? And here's why I asked that, because I always took the message that Yoda was sending Luke with when he went into the cave was like, your weapons, you will not need them. He was trying to encourage Luke to leave them behind. The whole idea is that he was going to go into that cave, and if he used his weapons and gave into his hate, then he was going to get this image of that it could easily be his face behind the
Mhm.
mask. But
Mhm.
Luke went in with his weapons this time, fought Vader again, and took off his head for it to be Leia's face. So I don't. Well, I think it was cool that there was a reveal of Leia. I'm not sure that the setup should have been the same for the purposes of this story. That he
Mhm.
should have gone in there and somehow other got the revelation that it was Leia behind that mask. You understand what I'm saying?
I do. I think for me, the way that I took it was because of the fact that he had been so far into his training at that point with the 5 years, that when he went into that cave, even though he didn't listen to Yoda and he did take his weapons, that it wasn't as substantial a move for him to the dark side because he'd had so much training as so much of a warning about Leia because it was someone that he cared for. You know what I mean? That it was like, okay, it may not be you. And of course we knew that they were twins. They didn't know that they were yet. You know what I'm saying? So it was almost like a
Yeah.
message to Luke in that way.
But see, this visit to the cave was like the same time period as his original one in The Empire Strikes Back. He has a second encounter in the cave that 5 years later,
Later.
where
Okay,
where
yeah,
he
you're right. You're right.
where he doesn't take his weapons, and and that's when he sees visions of the Force in the Force, including Qui-Gon, a young Obi-Wan, Shmi Skywalker, young Anakin,
Yeah.
Padme, and Darth Maul, plus the dark side Leia, and all
Mhm.
that. When he's open to listening to the Force through there, which is a little bit different, I think, take on what that cave actually was than what we're gotten from the current continuity. But again, I don't want to quibble about that first journey into the cave, but if I could tweak anything in that issue, it would have been do something a little bit different about how he went into the cave so that made the Leia reveal a little bit more. I don't know, maybe a little more sense to me.
Mhm.
But
No, I could
anyway,
see that. Yeah, no,
yeah.
I could see that's a good point.
So Han shows up, tells Luke about Leia, and Han's ready to leave, and Yoda tells me, "You're not ready yet." And he's like, "But my training was about complete." And he's like, "No, you're not ready because there's something I have to tell you." And so Yoda in life, as opposed to on his deathbed, gets to sit Luke down and tell him the truth about Anakin being Darth Vader and that he also has a sister, Leia. So Luke is now getting this knowledge not from Darth Vader, but from Yoda that Vader is Anakin, that's his father, and that Leia is his sister. And he does mention, he's like, no, that's not true. That can't be possible before he comes to his senses there. What did you think about the way that reveal went and the explanation that he got from Obi-Wan about how, why he wasn't told this all along?
Yeah, it's like Yoda's just like spilling the tea, no big deal. Like here's all of it, just laying it right out all on the line. And I have to say I can see as far as how these stories and in this are being told, why that could make sense, and work. I do like the original better because, of course, there's the no, that can't be possible. And there's just so much more emotion to it.
Mm-hmm.
This just didn't seem like there was much emotion to it. You know what I mean? It was just like, okay, here's the news. Here it is. I'm just going to tell you, do with it what you will. So it wasn't as much of an impact for me.
Yeah, and there's a couple things about that. I agree with you. The way it came out in The Empire Strikes Back was like the one of the greatest twists
Oh, yeah.
in movies, period, when the way it was delivered. But
Hmm.
Luke ran off before he was ready to carry the burden of that knowledge, and that's what Yoda tells him here. It's like, we didn't tell you earlier because it was a terrible time for you. You
Right.
were dealing with all this stuff, and that would have potentially set you off on the dark side if you found that out. And now you've had the training, you know, Yoda tells Luke, you've picked up more in these 5 years than any apprentice I've ever had. And so you're now ready to learn this and to handle it. And he's right. I mean, Luke processes it. You know, he's despite that initial denial of it, he's like, "You're right. I can feel his force. It's right." And then it dawns on him that Leia's his sister, and it's right. Same way that happened in Return of the Jedi
Mhm.
when Kenobi says, like, your sister is safe and anonymous. He's like, Leia's my sister, because he was ready for it. And now, and so he's in the same place here. Is it to have the same impact? No, not by a mile. But I also, this works because we are, as readers, already knew that twist.
Right, true.
And
Yeah.
if we hadn't seen The Empire Strikes Back before, this would been like, oh, that's something, but it would not have had the impact that it did on us here, or in the movie,
Mhm.
I should say.
Right, right. And the fact that Luke's had a lot more time with training in these comics than he, did in reality.
Hmm.
In reality, you know what I mean? In
Sure.
the movies.
Right. So they all head off to Coruscant, and by all, I mean all. We've got Han Solo, Chewbacca, the repaired R2D2, Luke Skywalker, and Yoda are going to Coruscant. The Death Star, I'm sorry, the Justice Star, as it's been renamed, what do you think about that? The renaming it the Justice Star.
That was one thing that didn't really work for me. I kind of like chuckled at that and I thought, okay, I mean, I could see that they would want to maybe rename it, but that's just kind of going a little too far in the opposite direction,
Hmm.
kind of thing. But what do you
Yeah,
think?
a little corny. I mean, they should just stuck with like
Mhm.
it's DS1. Is what the designation was for that battle station. So I don't know. The
Yeah.
Justice Star was a little, but the Justice Star is the new seat of government that will be able to go anywhere in the galaxy and bring the Emperor's justice to all these worlds. Okay, neat idea, but there it is. But they get there, and as part of this 5th-year anniversary of the destruction of the rebellion, like the entire Imperial fleet is there, and like including 7, 8, 9 super star destroyers that are in orbit
Mhm.
around Coruscant. And Han and Luke drop off Yoda and R2D2 at the Death Star, and then they head down to Coruscant. Yoda uses various Jedi mind tricks to get to Grand Admiral Tarkin, where he uses a mind trick on him to get a tour of the battle station and then to the bridge, where he commences having Tarkin fire on Star Destroyers using the
Yeah.
super weapon. I don't know. That didn't work real great for me, because I just don't think Tarkin's the type that would fall prey to the Jedi mind trick based on what we've been told about it. But what did you think?
Right. Yeah. And I think issue 4 overall, I kind of teetered back and forth between, okay, I'll let this in, and oh no, this just does not feel right.
Yeah.
And kind of backtracking to the whole idea of Yoda going with them. I was like, oh wow, okay. So he's must be healthy and okay.
Right.
Kind of it was like, wow, all right, this is happening, sort of a thing. But yeah, the whole mind trick thing, as you were just mentioning, again, as you said, given what we've seen of Tarkin in the original movies, is that he did not believe in any of that stuff.
Right.
It's just like this hokey religion. And so how would he be so weak-minded as to fall for that? So that for me didn't quite work. I mean, I understood why they did it for the storytelling and to accomplish what they did in this, but yeah. There's a couple other things that were kind of not really working for me either, but 3PO is one of them, but we'll get to that in a second.
The fact that he had been
Brainwashed,
yeah,
essentially,
so that he
reprogrammed.
pulls a gun on Han Solo and like has an armor around his throat. Like, I don't think 3PO is capable of that. But so after dropping Yoda and R2 off at the Justice Star, I am doing pretty good about keeping calling it that, I must say.
Yeah, you
They
are.
head down to Coruscant and get to the Imperial Palace, where they confront the Emperor, Vader, and Leia. And Vader, uh, or the Emperor, has Vader give Leia his lightsaber, and she basically engages Luke in a saber duel. And then this knowledge comes out that Vader is Luke's father, and that Leia is Luke's sister. And Vader did not realize that Leia was his daughter this entire time. And eventually, Luke gets through to Leia about what's going on, and so she decides to no longer fight him. And this is essentially the moment in Return of the Jedi where the Emperor unleashes Force lightning on Luke, except for now he's hitting both Luke and Leia. But Vader comes to the rescue, and of course, he hasn't just gone through a massive duel with Luke at this time. And they escape right before Yoda crashes the Justice Star, Death Star, whatever you want to call it,
Right.
into the Imperial Palace, taking out the Emperor, Darth Vader himself, and R2D2. So, what did you think about that climax?
Well, the fact that Vader had no idea that Leia was his daughter was a little hard for me to swallow just because of the fact that I would think that he could sense that
Mm-hmm.
in terms of Leia's force presence and the fact that she probably resembled Padme quite a bit,
Yeah.
even in mannerisms or whatever. But I tried to kind of set that aside just a little bit. And the only thing that I could think of was that somehow maybe Palpatine was able to sort of mask Leia's true identity from Vader. And so I thought, okay, maybe that's something that he was able to
But
pull off.
the Emperor like goaded Vader about this.
Mhm.
Like, how could you not sell this
Yeah,
entire time?
true. He
But
did.
he also never told Vader that. So I don't
Mhm.
know. That was a
He was
little,
just gaslighting him the whole time, but
yeah.
how could you not? I did like the fact that they called them the twins, that the twins did this and the twins did that, which I thought was really cool. And the fact that the only thing is though that Vader, if this were the actual story, doesn't have as much of a presence, gravitas as he does in
Hmm.
the movies. He just seems kind of like a side character almost. That he's a villain, but do you really take him that seriously? Maybe not.
Yeah, I think you're 100% correct, Jay. Here's the thing: if I was grading this story, I think the first three issues, all things considered, range somewhere between a B plus and an A.
Mhm.
And because some of the art was a little strange in the first two, there was a
It
different
was.
artist for the first two in the second two. But we get to this fourth issue. I think there was just too much to get done in a 4 issue
Mhm.
series. This could have benefited from 2 or 3 more issues. And if they did that, I think there's a lot of things they could have done that would have helped this make sense. One, as far as Yoda, and I'm just going to call it the Death Star now, the Death Star, that really would have benefited if there was some sort of fledgling new rebellion out there, or the remnants of the old rebellion that were looking for some way to help out with this. And Han had maybe made contact with them and they got to the Death Star. There needed to be some sort of assault on the Death Star, like what we
Mhm.
got in Return of the Jedi. Or again, a new version of what happened in New Hope. Something needed to happen there. Now, of course, they probably fixed that defect after Yavin 4, but something like that I think was important. I think that's an important aspect of Star Wars storytelling. Those against all odds taking on the giant technological monstrosity. Two, you're right. Vader's role in the finale was not big enough. He basically went after the Emperor, held up his hands, got shocked, and then fell over and then
Mhm.
died
Right.
when it came down to it. And something more that really would have given Luke not only a chance to fight for Leia's soul, but to fight for Vader's soul and the resistance from Vader, or maybe stepping in when Leia was like about to deliver a killing blow and then stopping her from doing something with the Force. Something more needed to happen there.
Right.
But again, in only 4 issues, they had a lot to cram in there in that last one. I just would have liked to have seen something a bit more cinematic with the resolution of this. I get Yoda's decision. Well, he did because basically he had told them that, I'm ending the finality of my life, and
Mhm.
so this is the way to do it. But I don't know, maybe him there in the Death Star holding off legions of stormtroopers while whatever assault team is making their move would have been cool. I don't, but I don't know. I just kind of, those are my few critiques on this about the changes I would like to see in the story, just to put it over the top for me.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on like almost all of that. The only thing I think I would have liked to have seen different is Yoda actually facing off against Palpatine himself.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And because that would have, for me anyways, would have been a lot more personal. It's almost like I understand the idea of using Palpatine's own weapon against him in such a manner that it literally crushed everything that he had worked for. But then again, there's also and the fact that that Palpatine had taken over the Jedi Temple and made it into the Imperial Palace was a big slap in the face, to
Mhm.
Yoda. So he definitely used it in that regard, but it would have been nice to see that be a little bit more personal, like a one-on-one duel sort of a thing.
If I can step in there, I think
Yeah.
if this had come out after Revenge of the Sith,
Hmm.
there's a good chance you would have seen that.
Yeah. Yeah. Almost like a rematch kind of a
Right.
thing.
To just
Hmm.
add that symmetry to the story.
Yeah.
But I think it's that element is probably a victim of the timing of when
Hmm.
this was released.
Mhm. Oh,
So
yeah, absolutely.
yeah, again, I like the story overall. I like what it accomplished. Again, it's a what if, not an entirely full fleshed out alternate universe of
Sure.
this type of a thing. And so I think it worked for the 4 issues it was.
Mhm,
It just could have used a stronger finale when it came
mhm.
down to it. So I
Yeah,
like the
no, I agree.
ideas that were presented in the first 3 issues. Just the execution of the last one was a little bit on the lacking side. But
Mhm.
yeah, I understand why it came out the way it did. So you
Sure.
got any other final thoughts on all this before we wrap it up?
I love the double-bladed lightsabers from the temple guards. I thought that was cool. Cool little touch. Kinda like the
Pardon.
Darth Maul
Yeah,
Vader
yeah.
or
I like the
Vader
way that
lightsabers.
they showed up with that. That was pretty cool. Uh,
Uh-huh.
and then Luke pulled the Kylo Ren by using the Force to slice a couple of them in half with the double wave lightsaber.
Yeah. That was
So
sweet.
yeah.
Very much so.
So okay.
But
Oh, and then I
yep.
guess the return of R2D2. His memory had been downloaded to the Falcon, so they could put in a new body. That got crammed right in there to the end. But okay.
Mhm.
So be it.
Mhm.
And I guess one last thing. Alea is then crowned the new chancellor of the New Republic once in the aftermath of all this. I'm not sure that sits right with me either. That she essentially is afforded like the double redemption, the reverse
Mhm.
redemption. She was a rebel, then she was embraced by the Empire as a new senator from Coruscant, and part of that hierarchy. And then all's forgiven again by the other side,
Right.
so that she can be the chancellor. So I don't know that really worked for me so much. There's one thing about being redeemed, it's another about being forgiven for all this so many different times from so many different directions.
Right, right. No, I totally agree with you on that one. I guess the only way I could reconcile that is just because it kind of brings it back full circle to reality, quote unquote. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah. Legends reality at the time. Anyway.
Exactly.
So okay. Well then, yeah, we could probably spend another 20 minutes talking about this, but I think we did a good job covering it. And I'm glad
Yeah,
we
lots of
read
fun.
it, and I'm really excited to get into The Empire Strikes Back, Infinity's story.
Me too.
We're going to mix up our schedule probably, just because the priority is going to be getting our coverage of the Bad Batch out.
Mhm.
So that may not be on necessarily a Monday when we do the next version of this, but it could be Wednesdays. We'll find out going forward. But yeah, we'll definitely be getting those out there when we can.
Mhm.
So yeah, just be on the lookout for those. All right. I've blabbered on enough there. Just want to thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stars and our discussion of Star Wars Infinities: A New Hope. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to get those episodes covering Infinities: The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, then make sure you hit the subscribe button on your podcatcher, and you'll get those when they come out in a couple of weeks. And we're eager to bring them to you. I'd like to remind you that you can find all previous episodes of the show over on retrozap.com, which is also home to all the other shows on the network, covering everything in geekdom, whether it's past, present, or upcoming. As always, we greatly appreciate your ratings and reviews on your podcatcher of choice, especially if that's Apple Podcasts. And it means a lot to us when you share the show and your favorite episodes on social media with your friends. So again, for those of you that have helped us grow in that manner, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and we encourage you to keep doing that. That is a major part of our success. So with all that having been said, Jay, you want to remind everybody what those social media contacts are and where else they can find us across the internet?
Of course. We are very conveniently found on Facebook, Instagram, and X at Podcast Stardust. And you can also check out all of our Pinterest boards and our 2 YouTube channels where we have our regular YouTube and our YouTube music channel as well now. And we're definitely getting a lot of traffic out there, and we so appreciate that. So head over there, like and subscribe if you haven't already, and make sure you share that out. And if you're up for some real time discussion and some chatter and you want to discuss this topic further, we would love for you to join us on our Discord room, which is part of the Wretches Up Discord server. And we are just one of many different rooms over there. So all the shows have their own room, and there's tons of pop culture geekery going on. So chances are you'll find a room to have a heck of a lot of fun in. And then we also have a TeePublic store, so you can check that link in our show notes. And if you are in need of a closet refresh, some new sweatshirts, t-shirts, coffee mugs, tote bags, anything like that, you can hit us up over there. And you can also hit us up for a Saber Masters lightsaber. So we are very proud to partner with Saber Masters, where you can right now pick up 2 for 1 on their 2.0 lightsaber that they have going on, and they are $199, and you can get 2 for 1, and you can also get $10 off just by using the code Stardust at checkout, and that helps us out as well. So you can go to www.sabermasters.com, and once again, use that link in our show notes to get you right there. So with that, Dennis, I know you've got some warp trails on the horizon here in just a couple months. So why don't you tell everybody about that and anything else you've got going on?
Right. We're getting closer and closer to the April 4th release of season 5 of Star Trek Discovery. And when that happens, my wife and I will be covering it on our Star Trek podcast, which is called Warp Trails. It is exclusive to the Wretches App podcast feed. So if you want to check that out, then head to your podcatcher choice, look for the Wretches App feed, and you can find us there. So we won't have any episodes till April, but if you want to find out what we had to say about the previous seasons of Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, and Strange New Worlds, then head over to wretchesapp.com and you can find all of our old episodes there. Jay, I know you got a busy near future in the world of cosplay. So you want to fill everybody in on what's about to happen.
Yes, that's definitely a good problem to have. So over on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay, you can catch all of my current and upcoming cosplay adventures as Ahsoka, 2 different versions of Hera, as well as the fourth sister from the Kenobi series, and upcoming a new original concept Mandalorian, speaking of legends, that is going to be based on Tahiri Vela. So April's definitely going to be a big month for me. I've got like 4 different appearances and conventions going on in April. So hit me up over on my Instagram once again at j.snipscosplay for that and for a heck of a lot of other fun.
All right. Upcoming on the show this Wednesday, it is the next installment in our Phantom Menace series as we celebrate the 25th anniversary of the first movie from the prequels. And then on Friday, we'll be getting back into some Star Wars news. So thanks for listening to episode 692 of Podcast Stars, everyone. Have a great week. Until next time, may the Force be